okay, we'll do a series. And what we'll do is we'll just basically, at the end of the day, we'll walk around and we'll show what we've done and how we've done it. That was our initial idea, but we hadn't got a clue what we were doing. We were two bellends from Shropshire with a penchant for grinders and hammers. So we shot this and I put this thing together and we watched it and it was absolute dog shit.
Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we're joined by Richard from Bad Obsession Motorsport in the UK. I'm going to assume that anyone who's ever been on YouTube and has a mild interest in cars has probably stumbled across Project Binky, which is their insane Mini fitted with a Celica GT-Four 3S GTE engine and four-wheel drive running gear. And as I mentioned during this interview with Richard, it's kind of like trying to fit a square peg where there is no hole at all. These Minis are tiny, the 3S GTE is not that, and trying to fit everything is a challenge. This has actually been a project that at this point has been on the go for about 11 years, and I'll actually give them credit for staying motivated for this long with a project. But of course, the elephant in the room here is why isn't it finished already? And of course, we're going to find out exactly why that is. And reassuringly, it's actually pretty close to completion, so it won't be too much longer. We find out about Richard's background, how he and Nick came together to form Bad Obsession Motorsport, how Project Binky came up as a bit of a drunken chat and a bit of a joke, and maybe just a bit of a challenge as well. We also find out about Richard's background in motorsport. He's actually quite an accomplished racer. We talk about the different styles of racing for those who maybe are a little bit budget limited and want to dip their toe in the water. We'll talk about karts, open wheel cars, and we also talk about one of their other projects, which is a very budget oriented race series in the UK. And before we get into our chat with Richard, for those who are new to the Tuned In podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school where we specialize in helping you to make your car go faster. We cover topics on engine tuning, wiring. We also cover engine building, fabrication, 3D modeling, and CAD. The list goes on. You can find a complete list of our courses at hpacademy.com/courses. They are all delivered via high definition video modules that you can take from anywhere in the world, provided you've got an internet connection, meaning you can learn from the comfort of your own place and you can learn at your own pace. All of our courses also come with a 60-day, no questions asked money back guarantee. So if for any reason you purchase and decide it's not quite what you expected, let us know. You can get a full refund. Also, for our podcast listeners, you can use the coupon code podcast75 and that will get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. I'll put that coupon code in the show notes. Lastly, if you like free stuff, then I've got a deal for you. We're always partnering with some of the biggest names in the automotive performance industry and giving away great prizes. This could include an aftermarket ECU, maybe a set of pistons or connecting rods, or just about anything in between. You can find our latest giveaway at hpacademy.com/giveaway. It's free to enter. There's absolutely no catch, and if you win, we will ship the prize to your door no matter whereabouts in the world you live. So no reason not to get in on our next giveaway. All right, enough with that introduction. Let's get into our interview now. All right, welcome to the podcast, Richard. Thanks for joining us. And as always, let's start by finding out a bit about your background and specifically how you developed an interest in cars.
Cool. Well, that's absolutely my dad's fault.
It often is.
It often is, and it really is one of those things. And one of my first memories is going to my dad's best friend's shed. And my dad used to restore vintage commercial vehicles with his friend John. So we had a 1923 Model T Ford bus. We had a 1936 Leyland Badger. We had a 1940 Vulcan. We had an Atkins 8 Wheeler. We had all sorts of great big commercial vehicles that Dad used to do. And I remember 1979, number one in the UK was a song called Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick by Ian Dury and the Blockheads. And I remember that on the radio. So I was 4. And I remember being at the place And he was always involved every Sunday morning with John, restoring these vintage vehicles. John would do the coach work, Dad would do the mechanicals. And we just got involved in, I just loved going with him because, being a 4-year-old, being a 5-year-old, being a 6-year-old, you just want to be with your dad and doing the stuff that he wanted to do.
Yeah, of course.
And his love of cars and racing rubbed off on me, really. So it was completely my dad's fault.
Fair. Okay. I mean, I can sort of see if you're around that sort of work all day when you're 3, 4 growing up, you don't really probably have too much choice. I see there's a somewhat of a disconnect between restoring old vintage commercial vehicles and racing. Can't imagine anything you just listed going that well on a racetrack. So how did that sort of connection happen?
Well, that was a little later on. I bugged him for a Tamiya Hornet in the early 80s or mid 80s. And I started racing radio control cars. My friends raced them, I raced them, and my dad got involved with a bunch of the other dads of the kids who were racing them and created a club. And we had our own 1/10 scale outdoor track with a big gantry with scaffolding to have the controllers and the drivers on. And we had jumps and we had this. It was fantastic. And then I graduated from there to go-karts when I was 12 in 1987. So I graduated to karts. But I remember watching Formula One with my dad since I could remember. So he was always into racing. He was always into cars, as well as doing all the restorations on stuff. But yes, I got involved in go-karting when I was 12 years old, yeah.
Okay. Just coming back to the radio control car side of things, obviously much cheaper form of motorsport than even karts, which can get more expensive than probably most people think. I am interested, do you learn anything from racing an RC car that you can then apply when you actually start driving a kart yourself, or is there no real transferable skills there? That's
an interesting one. I don't know whether there's probably more transferable skills from radio control cars to single seaters, than there is from radio control cars to karts. Mainly because there's no diff in a go-kart where there is in the radio control car. Because the RC car has suspension and they're oil filled, and you can tune them, and you can change the springs, and you can change the preload on the diffs, and you can do all these bits and pieces, and you can have forward. There's significantly more. You can change the anti-roll bar settings. You can do all that sort of stuff that you can't with a go-kart, but you can with a race car. So probably there's more transferable between RC cars and race cars than there is between RC cars and karts.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But I mean, it sounds from what you've just talked about there, a lot you can learn from setup on an RC car that transfers across, as opposed to maybe the actual driving side of things. Obviously, you're not going to feel what the RC car is doing, but interesting nonetheless. All right, let's talk about your experience in karts. So how did that all work out for you at the age of 12? What was the sort of learning curve like? Were you any good?
It was like anything. It's always when you first start out at something, the learning curve is extraordinarily steep because you're up against people that have done it for years. And even though starting in juniors at age 12, I was up against sort of 15 and 16-year-olds who'd been doing it for 5 or 6 years. So you start at the back, you start as a novice, you start on a black number plate, which denotes that you're a novice, you haven't done more than 6 races. And it's the same with everything. If you sort of try and trust somebody when you buy an outfit, and we bought a secondhand cheap outfit off a guy who we sort of trusted, we met, and it wasn't fantastic. It wasn't quite what he'd sold. Let's be honest.
It seems like it's normally the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. On the flip side, because it wasn't as good as possibly it could have been, it was older than he'd said, and the engine wasn't as good as he said. It meant that you had to work harder to do better. So when I'd cast off my novice plates and went on to the full plates, which meant that when you get drawn for the grid position for your heats, you can actually be drawn at the front. When you're a novice, you can't be drawn at the front. You're always starting at the back, which is great. It just makes total sense. It meant that I had to do better, and it taught me an awful lot. And having secondhand wets, secondhand cast off slicks, I never had anything new at that point because we were running on an absolute shoestring. It meant that a little later on, when we could afford to change class and buy a new kart, it meant that suddenly oh my God, I've got grip in the wet. All this stuff that I've learned trying to drive around these like absolute inefficiencies with this old car. Suddenly oh my God. And then that transformed my performance because I got a new car, so I got a new engine, I got new tires, I've got all this stuff that I hadn't never had before. And suddenly I'm up the road and it was absolutely amazing.
Coming back to the old kart that maybe wasn't quite where it was supposed to be, on face value, they seem like relatively simple chassis. I mean, I'm guessing there's a lot to it, and they're not as simple as on face value they may look. But if we don't have suspension, what are the things that make a difference between an old kart that's not quite where it needs to be and a newer kart?
Well, the main difference is that the chassis flexes because you've got no diff. The caster in the front means that when you turn the steering wheel, what you're doing is essentially lifting the inside rear wheel off the floor. And that allows the kart to turn. Because if you, like in a diff, you can have the inside rear wheel and the outside rear wheel running at different speeds. But when you haven't got one, you can't. So if you can't lift the inside rear wheel off the floor, then you end up understeering. So the caster makes that a difference. But the flex in the chassis, the difference in the flex in the chassis makes a difference in how much that inside rear wheel is picked up. So as the chassis work hardens over the years, over how much grief they've had and how many battles they've had and how many laps they've done, that flex changes. So how much the inside rear wheel picks off the floor is different. And in today's, like now, with the very sticky tires and the fantastic tracks and the amount of torque they've got, the top guys are changing their chassis very, very often indeed, like 3 or 4 races and 3 or 4 meetings and they're done. But back when I was racing, we were running on very hard tires that didn't have a huge amount of grip on them. So it didn't really take that much. But this particular chassis had been around for a while. And then once we changed to a new one with a different design and a brand new chassis that was flexing correctly, which was straight and flat, that made all the difference to me. But karting is extraordinarily physical because you're literally physically turning the wheel and physically turning the inside wheel off the floor. So you're picking the weight up when you turn your steering wheel. And it may seem simple because they have no suspension. There's very little to change. But setting a go-kart up is a black art. There is so much to change.
I was going to ask that next. I mean, again, you don't see a lot of potential opportunities for tuning changes on the chassis, but obviously I'm wrong. So what changes can you make and what are the effect of those changes?
Well, it's all to do with the flex. It's all to do with what we call jacking, which is that picking the inside wheel off the floor. So when I first started in the karts that I drove, I wasn't allowed to change the caster angle or the camber angle. They were fixed. But most of the karts these days have movable caster and caster angles. So you can always do that. But the biggest change that I made were front track width, because the front track width makes such a difference in how much the inside rear wheel jacks off the floor. So the wider the track, the more it jacks. The narrower the track, the less it jacks. So you can induce a more understeer or oversteer depending on how wide the front track is. The rear track tended to stay the same. You'd set it at something like 1385 mil or 1390 or something like that. The maximum was 1400. So that's the maximum track width was about 1400. So you'd pretty much stay the same in the dry. And then you'd tune the kart on the front. But you could also, the way the seat stiffness, you could buy a dozen different seat stiffnesses. And that changed the way the kart flexed. How many seat stays you put on it, which is the kart sits in four points. The kart seat sits in 4 points, 2 at the bottom, 2 on the side. And then you can have some extra ones high up right underneath right where the top of the seat sits underneath your armpits. And they go back to the back axle. So you could have 2 on each side. You could have 1 on each side. You could have none on each side. And that all changes the way the kart flexes, even as much as how tight the floor tray was. We'd change that.
So everything is what you're saying?
Like literally everything. And every single little tiny bit made a difference.
And I'm guessing here these subtle changes is not really a clear correlation between your seat stays, for example, and a lap time. You literally just have to go out and test and see if you're moving in the right direction or moving away from the correct ballpark.
Yeah, it often seat stays was one of those things where it really sort of meant it was really dependent on how much rubber was down on the track.
Sure. Okay. Am I right in also guessing the tuning setup for the chassis is going to vary depending on whether you've got a slow, tight, twisty track versus maybe something that's a little bit higher speed?
Very much so. I mean, we used to run our two tracks that Dad and I used to race on were Chasewater, which was in the West Midlands, which was this tiny little 500-meter track. And then that was on the second Sunday of the month. And the fourth Sunday of the month was Wigan, which was Three Sisters racetrack, which was the biggest track in the country. It was huge and it had very long sweeping corners, and the setup couldn't be more different.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. But tuning a go-kart chassis sounds very simple. It is extraordinarily not. It's much more complex than people give it credit for.
Oh, I think we've got a sense of that just from what you've mentioned. Ultimately, flex, chassis setup aside, obviously this is working around that lack of a differential in the rear, which typically is going to cause push or understeer on corner entry. Even with all those tuning changes in mind, is there a different driving style to deal with the inherent understeer? Or once you've got that chassis set up, does it actually drive like something that has a differential?
I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I've taught dozens and dozens of hundreds of people how to drive karts. Now, whether that's been any helpful to them, I don't know. But generally speaking, if you've got your kart set up correctly, what tends to happen and what I like to happen is that you make one steering movement. So you turn the kart in, and then almost immediately you come the steering wheel back to center. And then that steering input, if you've got the braking point correct, you've got your entry speed correct, that steering input is all you need to do that corner. It's a 90 degree, it's a hairpin, it's a whatever, unless it's a really long one where you have to hang on to it a little bit. But generally speaking, the sort of 90 degrees, the short corners, you just turn it in and back to center. And that turn it in and back to center is all you need to do that corner. And the kart will naturally drift to exactly where you want it to go. But that's dependent on an awful amount of things going right for you. So as I say, this, braking point, corner entry speed, all that sort of stuff. The amount you've turned it, because if you turn too much, it'll over rotate. And if you turn too little or you turn too late, it'll push like crazy. So yes, the least amount of steering input is the best, because the moment you start turning the steering wheel, because you've got no diff, if you turn the steering wheel, the rear tires are working against each other, which means that you're slowing down. You're taking speed off, you're taking power off the engine. So the closest to straight you can be with the steering wheel all the time, the faster you're going to be, because the engine and the drivetrain is freed up. So you've got to free that kart up as much as you possibly can.
Okay. Now, we sort of see karts become this sort of feeder series or stepping stone for, I think, probably just about everyone who's currently in Formula One, obviously the pinnacle of the sport. What is it about karts that makes it such a mainstream way of getting into open wheel racing? And then obviously if budget and talent are there, the likes of IndyCar, Formula One, etc.
Yeah. Two things as far as I'm concerned. One is racecraft, and that's the number one thing as far as I'm concerned, because you're dealing with you may only be going 60 miles an hour, but everybody else is doing 60 miles an hour. And a crash at 60 miles an hour is still a crash, and it's still going to hurt, believe me. So picking your moment, attacking at the right time, defending at the right time, being in the right place at the right time. Racecraft is something that you can't teach off track. You have to do it. And you have to get it wrong. And only by getting it wrong do you get it right. So the racecraft is probably the number one thing. The second thing is being comfortable with the vehicle moving underneath you. Because as I say, when you turn the steering wheel in and come back to center, all that's happening is the car is sliding to a certain degree or another. So if you're happy and you're comfortable with the vehicle moving underneath you, whether it's being a big lurid slide or whether it's being understeer or it's sliding up that, or it's just a beautiful four-wheel drift, if you're happy with the kart or the vehicle moving underneath you, then you can apply that. It's not a surprise when you step up. So those are the two things as far as I'm concerned. Racecraft is the number one thing. So learning how to attack, learning how to defend, learning when to attack, learning when to defend, learning where to put yourself on the track, learning not to look behind you, learning all those bits and pieces that don't necessarily come naturally, and then being happy with the vehicle moving underneath you.
Interesting you say there, learning not to look behind you. So you run your own race and hope that whoever's behind you is just going to stay there?
It's extraordinarily easy to say. It's a much less easy thing to do in practice. But yes, and this is, again, I can only speak for myself, but the moment that you look behind you, the guy that's behind you sees you looking behind you and thinks, I got you.
Yeah, fair fair.
So if you don't look behind you and you just crack on, you can feel the cart come up alongside you. You can feel the guy behind you. You can probably, chances are, let's be honest, you can feel a nudge. You don't need to look behind you to know that someone's there.
You can also hear the cart behind you.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So yeah, using other sensors than actual vision to know that you've got someone pretty damn close to you. And you're right, there's always going to be a little bit of nudging, a little bit of bump drafting maybe.
Yeah, of course there is.
I think what you're mentioning though is so important, because it's one thing going out on a qualifying lap on an empty session and laying down an incredibly fast lap time. Obviously, that's a skill that a professional race driver or anyone who wants success in racing is going to need. If you're not fast, you're not even going to be on the track. But it's very different also when you're racing in a field of cars and having that understanding of where to place the car in order to block or defend, and also exactly where you should place the car in order to attack. And like you say, I mean, those are skills that I think only come with time.
Yes, I totally agree. And that's the beauty about karts, is you can do that at a much lower cost level and time level. Because when I was racing, we were doing 3 heats and a final in a day. So we'd have 4 races every day for the most part. So that's a lot of races. And if you were racing every other weekend, that was, you were getting through some races.
I think it's just like any skill. You need that repetition to actually build up the muscle memory and just become comfortable and good at doing it. To come back to one of your other points as well, I think what you mentioned about being comfortable with the cart moving around under you, is really, really important. Because, I mean, if you get into a saloon car racing, the cars don't tend to move around as much as karts do, and then you get something a little bit wrong, get into a slide, and if that's not second nature to you, it can be a scary situation.
It can, and that's the first thing that novices have to learn when they're learning how to race karts. It's nothing to be afraid of, it's just something to be aware of. And providing that you can mitigate for that, so like you steer into the skid or you back off if you're understeering or whatever, you can learn those things and then you'll be comfortable. But the moment there's that fantastic feeling when you just, a slick tire, as you know, essentially brings 100% of its grip at a certain yaw angle. So you have to be sliding to have that 100% of the grip. So you've got to be comfortable with it sliding because it's always sliding.
Otherwise, you're not maximizing the tire.
Right. So that's a really important lesson.
Yeah. Now, in this chat, I want to talk about one of your projects, Bargain Racement. We'll get into that later on. But essentially, I'm interested from your perspective, for enthusiasts who want to get into racing, what is the path that you'd recommend in terms of a cost-effective way of getting on track? Is it still karts? I mean, they are cheap, but maybe, again, as I mentioned earlier, not as cheap as people think if you want to be competitive. Or, is doing something like you did with Bargain Racement a viable alternative? What's your thoughts on that?
I suppose to a certain extent, it depends on where you are. I don't know the ins and outs of the sort of the way that motorsport works in other countries. I can only really speak for the UK and to a certain extent the States because I lived there for a bit. But what's happening now, and to a certain extent I was part of it, is that you can absolutely hire very high performance go-karts on a race by race basis, on a arrive and drive basis for reasonable money. And if you don't have the problem, I mean, it's a problem for some, it's a joy for others, of being able to, of having to keep your own car and build your own car or kart, then that's a really good way of doing it. I thoroughly recommend karts because it's by far the most cost-effective way of getting into competition. And I believe wholeheartedly that go-karting or karting is a motorsport in its own right. And I don't necessarily think it should be pigeonholed into just a way of getting into something else. I love karting. I always loved karting. I think it's in its own right, it's fantastic. But if you want to progress, that's fine. But if you start there, you learn the basics. You learn the stuff that I just talked about the racecraft, about the kart moving underneath you, about ways to look after tires, about all those things at a very low cost and low entry cost. And at that point, if you've got proficient at that and you're happy to move up to something else, then you can pick your poison. You can go saloon car, you can go tin tops, you can do what we did with Bargain Racement with the C2 over the C1, or you can go single seaters with Formula Ford or something that's a little less expensive. I mean, everything's expensive when it comes to racing.
It's all relative,
But
isn't it?
it is all relative. But you can absolutely pick your poison at that point. But I would thoroughly recommend people start in something that is easy to stop if it's not for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I think. It'd be very easy to get involved in something of, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 and above, and then all of a sudden find out that it's not quite what you expected it to be, or not quite what you wanted, and that's quite a large financial commitment compared to karts. Let's sort of come up to speed a little bit with your trajectory in motorsport. I think we've kind of gone down a pretty deep rabbit hole, but for the sake of completeness, let's get through to modern day. So you went from karts. What have your other forms of motorsport been, and what have you learned along that journey?
From go-karts, I went into the first single-seater I drove was a Formula Vauxhall Junior, which was essentially a Formula Ford car, but with a Vauxhall engine or an Opel engine or a however you Holden engine. It was a little 1600 overhead cam with slicks, and that was Formula Vauxhall Junior, which was a very low cost entry level. Nothing's low cost, all relative. Entry level single seater series, and that was mind-blowingly different. It was so different to karts. It took me quite a long way to get my head around that. And then we had 3 or 4 races in Vauxhall Junior, and then we went back to go-karts. So we retained the go-karts. And then we tried Formula Ford with the treaded Avon ACB 10s with a 1600 cross-flow Ford engine, which was 105 horsepower. It was neither in nor there. But, oh my God, could you get that car into some angles? The yaw angles in it were unbelievable. I loved driving it. It was so much fun to drive. And I still absolutely adore Formula Ford racing. I just adore it because I distinctly remember following a guy around Mallory Park in Leicestershire. The first corner at Mallory Park is a great, big, massive, long right-hander, huge, great big thing, taken in top gear. And I was following him, and he was moving around. The car was just slow, like moving around all over the place. All this opposite locking. I was thinking, you're completely out of control. And then I realized I was doing exactly the same thing. And and at that point, I just loved driving that thing, and I loved driving the Formula Fords. The single seaters really, really appealed to me. And then I moved to the States. I moved to the US for a few years. I worked over there, and I drove. Back at Mallory Park, I managed to blag my way into a 1962 Brabham BT-Four Formula One car, which was quite a thing. That was something else. My dad was friends with a guy called John Beasley, who owned quite a few of these historic vehicles. And he phoned my dad up and said, have you done the gearbox? Dad used to do some work for him. Have you done the gearbox on the Brabham? And he said, yeah. He said, look, I can't be bothered to run it in. Do you want to get Richard to do it? So Dad phoned me up and said, do you want to run the BT-Four? And I was like, yes. Are you kidding?
Hard to say no to something like that.
So yeah, I got to drive a Formula One, 1962 Formula One car around Mallory Park, which was lovely.
There wouldn't be too many people who can claim that.
Oh man, yeah, what a thing. I'm seriously, my God, the exposure as a driver. You got the fuel tanks literally down the side of you. And it's made out of, I don't know, like Kit Kat wrappers in tube form. And it is astonishing how brave these guys were.
Yeah, suffice to say, safety's come a long way in Formula One, but also clearly the cars are also much faster these days.
But just a little bit. But yeah, it was a lovely thing. 2.7 Coventry Climax. It had plenty of power, plenty of torque, and I loved that opportunity. But I've driven Caterhams. I've raced Caterhams in the US. Virginia International Raceway is the best circuit I've ever driven on. I love that circuit. I used to work there.
Driven on in iRacing, and that's about as far as I can claim, but couldn't agree more. Great track.
It's unbelievable. I was there when they first, I was lucky enough to be there when they relaunched it, when they reopened it back in the year 2000. I raced Caterhams there. I raced Formula Mazda there with the slicks and the wings. I've raced all sorts of bits and pieces. I've been very, very lucky. Because none of them have been my cars. They've always been somebody else's.
Oh, I mean, it's always best if someone else is picking up the tab and providing the hardware.
Yeah, too right. I mean, I remember crashing the Formula Ford car really badly at Mallory. It wasn't my car, and I took all 4 wheels, almost all 3.5 wheels off it. It wasn't I got caught up in somebody else's bloody accident, and then that was my bonus I just got from work down the pan having to rebuild the car. But, it's just one of those things.
In that respect, obviously crashing is something that can happen. We don't like to think about it, but it is sometimes an unavoidable consequence. And as you mentioned just then, sometimes it's you're just an innocent bystander that gets tangled up in someone else's mistake, and that ruins your day. Do you sort of have to go into motorsport with in the back of your mind that if you roll this thing up into a ball, you can walk away from it and it's going to be a total loss, and that's just fine?
I think it depends on the person. I mean, if you want to go out there and be competitive, you can't think any other way. Because the moment you think that the car is more important than winning the race, you're not going to win the race because somebody else is out there who doesn't care.
Yeah, but I guess also there's levels to this. If you want to be Max Verstappen, then that's the only way you can think. But for the average sort of weekday weekend warrior doing the odd track day or club level motorsport, there are other considerations there, and maybe that.
I know what you're saying. It is one of those things where, look, racing is fun. We all want to go and have fun, and nobody wants to write the car off. Nobody wants to roll the car. Nobody wants to get into a crash. But at the end of the day, racing is competitive, so you're always going to get to a point. The chances are that if you race as much as you want to, you're going to end up in an accident. There's just no getting away from it. You're going to have to. I think if you want to be competitive, I don't think you can worry about the equipment from that point of view. I think you have to just put that aside and deal with it afterwards. If you've got some people insure their cars, but insurance is unbelievably expensive, and there's always a massive excess, and it's dead money if you don't roll it. So it's one of those things that you think, right, if I got away with this. This is brilliant. I've got away with not a scratch on the car, or I've got a little bit of a wing dent. Brilliant. Hang on a minute, I've just put £2,000 into this insurance where I could have just done nothing.
Yeah, there's always the risk of it. You sort of roll the dice and hope that you made the right choice.
You do. But it's horses for courses. Somebody else asked me about insurance a little while ago, just a few weeks ago, and I've never insured any of the cars I've driven. I've just got on with it and had to deal with whatever happens next, whether I could afford it or not.
I guess a lot of that also comes down to, if it's your own equipment that you're putting on the line and risking, that might be different than if it's a lease car or you're driving a friend's car or something like that.
Yeah, because if it's mine, if it just stays in the garage until I can afford to fix it, fine. But if I've got to fix it for somebody else because I borrowed it,
that's a problem.
There's a problem, yeah.
All right, let's sort of pull this thing all back, and I want to talk about Bad Obsession Motorsport and what it is, but can you join the dots for us from your racing career to how you ended up with Bad Obsession Motorsport? What sort of were the jobs along the way, maybe? Okay,
so Bad Obsession Motorsport started as a conceit to get trade tickets for the Autosport International show.
It's very specific.
Well, the problem with the Autosport show was that Thursday and Friday were trade days and Saturday and Sunday were public days. And Thursday and Friday always had, and still do to this day, the engineering show. So there was always something really interesting about the engineering show, about stuff that you wouldn't see on the public days. And as a license holder, as an MSA UK racing license holder, we could go on Thursday and Friday, but Nick wasn't. But you could have a trade pass if you had a company. So we basically just made Bad Obsession Motorsport in 1990, I don't know, let's say 2 or 3, something like that. I can't remember, but something like that, as a way of getting trade tickets. And then when I raced Formula Vauxhall Junior, we had some little stickers made for the side of the Vauxhall Junior, which was the very first time that Bad Obsession Motorsport had ever been seen on a car or anything like that. So that's how we started that. And then it arrived on the rally, on Nick's rally car when we went rallying, and it basically grew from there. But essentially, it was just a way of getting. It was nothing. It was neither here nor there. It was literally just a way of getting trade tickets.
Well, at some point, obviously, you decided that there was a potential in a business around this. So, how did that develop? How did it go from getting backdoor entry into the Autosport show to a viable business?
When I lived in the US, this was 99, 2000, 2001, 2002. Towards the end of that time, Nick wanted to go. He built a 205 GTI rally car, and he wanted to go rallying. And I was probably the only mad enough person to offer to sit next to him. And I had to make a decision at that point whether to stay in the States or whether to come home to the UK. And at the time, I was a bit homesick, and Nick was going to the rallying, and I kind of just thought, I want to go back home.
You must have been missing the epic weather in the UK.
Oh, mate, the weather here is fantastic. I mean, it hasn't stopped raining for about 6 months. I mean, you'd love it. It's so I was very much missing the lovely weather back in the UK. But no, there's plenty of things to miss. So I had to make a decision to come home. So anyway, I came home and we went rallying, and we had the Bad Obsession Motorsport on the front bumper and what have you. And we built the rally car. And Nick was involved with some other projects. One of them which was a Saxo-powered Mini, the Mixo as they called it. There was a turbocharged Mini. There was some other bits. Mini's not, I don't want to be known for Mini stuff. It just happened that's the cars that sort of came in. And Bad Obsession as a company didn't really start until we started the YouTube channel.
Okay.
We both had our own jobs. We were both doing completely different things in opposite ends of the country. I was in Essex, Nick was in Shropshire, so we were hundreds of miles apart. And so Bad Obsession as a company, as an entity, as something that actually had some value, didn't really start until we started the YouTube channel.
Okay. All right. Let's take one step back before we start talking about YouTube. So we've talked about your sort of background at this stage, and mainly we've obviously focused on your racing. But what would you sort of say are your skill sets when it comes to automotive at this point, starting Bad Obsession Motorsport, and then also give us a rundown of Nick's?
Well, Nick would probably tell you something different, but I have very few skills compared to Nick. My background is in technical design, so I started as an apprentice at a body white assembly. So I learned AutoCAD back in the day, back on 486 DX66 machines, and I learned draftsmanship. I learned how to technical draw. I was a design engineer.
Okay,
so that's how I did my apprenticeship. So that's kind of where I started. But of course, when you race go-karts and when you race cars and when you get involved in all of these things that basically take up your life, you can't help but pick up some skills. And at the same time, Nick was working at vehicle dismantlers or a scrapyard. So he got to see the inside of cars. So he built up this incredible encyclopedic knowledge of the inside of cars and all the bits and pieces that go with them. So that helped both of us have slightly different skill sets. So that helped us become a better team than one of us would be on our own. And I think that's kind of how that works.
It's always nice when you've got that sort of synergy with two quite different but partially overlapping skill sets, and kind of the sum of the whole is more than the individual parts.
Very much so. And before he started down the other avenues, Nick trained when I was training as a design engineer. He was training as an architect. So drawing and that sort of thing is very much up his trousers. And he has this extraordinarily uncanny ability to see in 5 dimensions, I think it's 5 dimensions. But it's something that really frustrating, Andre, because you might know this, but when you've got somebody who can do something, they often can't understand how other people can't do that something. So he gets frustrated with other people, especially me, because I can't see in 5 dimensions. I can only see in 2, if that.
So you can't see the full concept that's very clear to him.
Yes. So and that can be quite frustrating for him. But that's his phenomenal ability, is to be able to see the finished product way before it's even started, and he's brilliant at that. So my skills are pale into insignificance, but I can edit a video, I suppose, and do a voiceover. That's about it.
Well, that's kind of important too. So the actual heavy lifting on the tools for fabrication, machining, etc., that's all falling to Nick.
Yes, very much so. I mean, not 100%, but the, as you say, the heavy lifting. Yes, very much so. Yeah, I'm at no bones to say that's not the case.
I mean, I think it's also important in a partnership like this to understand your limitations and to a degree stay in your own lane.
Yes, but at the same time, I like learning. I love learning new stuff. So, I've learned to TIG weld. I've learned to make. I've learned all the stuff that, and also when you've got something, especially the stuff that we've been doing recently, is that you simply, as one person, cannot do everything. You cannot do that. So being able to split the necessary learning between 2 people and then come together, 2 people that you trust each other, and then come back together at the end of it is quite important.
I think for me, I struggle from that sort of letting go. I mean, I'm not on the tools as much these days as I used to be, but I still am involved in our projects and understanding that I can't do everything now. And if I did, the car's probably never going to turn a wheel on a racetrack again. So kind of letting go a little bit and allowing other people to sort of develop the parts on the car. And hey, maybe sometimes they're not quite going to be how I would have done it, but maybe, hey, sometimes they're going to be actually better. So it's kind of an essential part, I think. Let's come back to the YouTube part of this. I'm just interested. What were you thinking when you decided, hey, you know what we should do is start a YouTube channel? Because that's quite a stretch.
Yes. Well, it boiled down to extraordinary frustration with what was available at the time. So you'd see something like Orange County Choppers, or you'd see something like, I can't remember what they were at the time, but you see these programs on TV and they'd show a restoration, like they'd show a 6-month restoration in 20 minutes, 22 minutes with adverts. And they'd gloss over the only bit that we felt was interesting, which was, how did you get from there to there? Like, we need a new fuel tank. Cut to break. There's a new fuel tank. Well, how the bloody hell did you make it? How did you get that? What you...
So those are the parts that were interesting to you that they felt the mainstream viewer obviously didn't need to know.
Sure, but you're absolutely right. And that happened time and time and time again with all these bits and pieces. So, okay, so we thought, well, okay, we'll do a series, and you'll probably ask about the Mini and the Celica in a minute, but we'll do a series. And what we'll do is we'll just basically, at the end of the day, when we've worked on it, we'll walk around and we'll show what we've done and how we've done it. And that was our initial idea. And we ran with it. We bought a camera for like 500 quid. We had no idea what we were doing. We hadn't got a clue what we were doing. We were two bellends from Shropshire with a penchant for grinders and hammers. And we hadn't got a clue. So we shot this, and I sort of had no idea what I was doing with editing. And I put this thing together, and we watched it, and it was absolute dog shit. And we just thought, well, we've just got to reshoot this because this isn't what we want to do. And that's when what you know as Project Binky sort of started. Okay, it's got slightly more polished over the years, but essentially that's how it started. It was, okay, right, well, actually, we can sort of maybe play a part here to a certain extent. We can actually make a bit of fun out of this. We can bring a bit of personality. We can actually make it not boring, if that's the idea.
Yeah, well, you managed to do a great job of injecting humor into it, which I think is one of the reasons that your channel resonates with your viewers. I think that's important. It's not just here's what we did.
No, I mean, we haven't really got we haven't really got an original idea in our heads. We've always plagiarized stuff that we love. So you'll have seen, like, we homage Red Dwarf and Blackadder and Monty Python and Airplane and Top Secret and all this stuff that we grew up watching and loving. We just bring an homage to that. And so there's lots of little bits and pieces there that hopefully, I mean, we always say to each other, when something makes us, the two of us, laugh, if only one person who's watching gets it, that's enough.
Yeah.
So if we like it and one other person gets it, I'm fine with that. I'm okay with it.
In terms of the growth of the YouTube channel, how long did it take to start getting some traction? And when did you sort of think to yourself, hey, there's actually something here, let's double down?
Probably 3 years or so. I think it took a little while to get going. We had absolutely no idea of how it would go down. We just didn't know. We thought we might get, a couple of hundred people that we knew and some of their friends watch. When it started getting 1,000 views and 2,000 and 5,000 and 10,000, and it was like, gee whiz, hang on a minute, that's crazy. And then it got bigger and bigger, and after, it took, I mean, nothing like recently, but we were only putting a video out every sort of 2 or 3, 4 months, because it was essentially Nick on a weekend and me I'd come up from where I used to live, it was at the time it was 200 miles away. I'd come up on a weekend once a month or so, and we'd shoot together. We'd do the pieces to camera together, and then I'd come back home, and Nick would email me the footage, and I'd sit there on a weekend editing it. So it was very hand to mouth at the time. But we had literally no idea, A, what we were doing, or B, what the reaction would be. So when it started blowing up, sort of 2 or 3 years into it, because that was really only probably 6 or 7 episodes, it really took us by surprise. We had no idea it would be as big, and it's not that big, but as big as it is. It totally blew us away, completely blew us away.
I think I checked before we went live with this, and I think you're around about 450,000 subscribers at this stage. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I mean, it would have been a shed load more had we actually got anything done the last couple of years.
But I mean, it's definitely no joke. Does it get to a point where the YouTube side of things, in terms of ad revenue, is a viable business in and of itself? Why I ask this, there'll be a bunch of enthusiasts listening to this interview, and they probably follow a few automotive YouTube channels like yourself, and are thinking to themselves, this is the future, this is what I want to do. And I mean, yes, there's a handful of automotive YouTubers who are doing incredibly well, and that is their main source of income. I also want to point out a few things here. Those people are the exception, not the norm. It is very, very difficult to actually make it as a primary source of income. Probably they're the 0.1%. And also, what you've even mentioned yourself, an overnight success 11 years on, and you sort of said, it took about 3 years before it really got some traction. So I think people also have this false sense of, we'll put up a video, it's going to get 1 million views overnight, and we're off to the races. But that's not the case. It's going to take some persistence, and that's a couple of 3 years in the making there for you. Yeah. So can you give us your perspective there?
I think that's absolutely right, Andre. I think it's one of those things that I remember. We were at the Goodwood Festival of Speed 2016. We'd taken the Mini we had Link ECU. We were invited by the Link ECU stand. We love the Link ECU guys. They're really good friends of ours, and they've been ever so great, ever so generous. And they invited us down there, and we met. There's a band you may know a band called Keen, and they had some big hits in the UK. And the drummer, Richard Hughes, happens to know who we are. He happened to be a fan of Project Binky, and he came along. And we chatted to him. And Keen hit the limelight with Somewhere Only We Know, I think was the track that really launched them. And he said to us, this was a massive hit. It totally launched us. We were an overnight success, 6 years in the making. They'd been touring and grafting for so long until they got that one thing. People
never see that hard work in the background, though. They just see their overnight success, and it's never an overnight success.
It never is. And the guys, I'm a massive Cletus fan. I'm a big Freddie Tavares fan. I love Freddie. He's a friend of mine. He came to my house. They do extremely well. They work extremely hard at it. But as you quite rightly say, there are very few that are making their absolute living from YouTube alone.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other thing I find personally very, very frustrating, we pivoted a little bit over COVID because obviously we couldn't go to events anymore. So we started doing some in-house vlogging of some of our builds. And my God, the extra time it takes when you're doing a job and actually making content on it versus just doing the job. It's probably at least 2, if not 3 times longer. And for me, sometimes, particularly when you've got a time crunch, you've got a race meeting in 2 weeks' time, all I want to do is finish the damn car. But there's not much point sort of doing all of this if we can't make content out of it. So it's a necessary evil. I'm sure you find exactly the same.
Oh, there's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And it's that trade-off, isn't it? It's trying to make a living. It's trying to be able to bring this revenue in through a particular source. At the same time, having the pressure of actually having to do something and then put it out next week and doing that. So, where do you put your resources and how do you split your time? None of it's easy.
Yeah, definitely. Not necessarily having to get into the numbers, but with that ad revenue, is it sort of enough to be a viable income stream in and of itself, or with that number of subs and the sort of views you're getting per video, is that sort of just it tops up maybe the motorsport budget a little bit?
No, it is. It was working very well for a while until we fell down this bloody rabbit hole, but it was working fine. Let's be honest, it was never going to make us millionaires. I don't think it ever would, but neither of us are particularly money orientated. It was one of those things that if it puts enough to pay the mortgage and put food on the table for the family, that's pretty much all I care about. Anything after that is a bonus. So even then, I don't think on its own, was viable on its own. No, I think you have to have other revenue streams, like amazing patrons, like the merchandise sales, like the other bits and pieces, that you can't put all your eggs in the YouTube basket because, well, let's be honest, YouTube, they do what they want. They could pull you at any time for any freaking reason.
Yeah, that's a very big risk when your whole livelihood is essentially down to a third-party website and an algorithm that you can't understand or have any control over. So it can be a little bit scary. I think you're absolutely right. Diversifying that risk away from just YouTube makes a lot of sense. Now, let's come back. You sort of said that Bad Obsession Motorsport really wasn't a business entity in and of itself until the YouTube channel sort of started gaining some ground. Now it is actually a viable business. So can you give us a bit of a rundown on the services that you're offering?
Yes. Again, it's your bread and butter is the YouTube stuff. Your bread and butter is the Project Binky and the other projects that we've done with we're doing with the truck and what have you. So that's the bread and butter. We get called all the time for all sorts of bits and pieces. We've done rewiring, we've done engine ECU wiring, we've done complete loom builds, we've done race car prep. So even like outsourcing, in as much as somebody phoned me up and said, I've got a Formula Ford car that I'm desperate to take out, but I have no idea how to make sure it's ready for the season. Can you come around and make it ready for the season? Well, we don't really have a way of doing it at our shed, but I went around there and did it remotely. So I sat there for 2 days and went through this thing like a fine tooth comb and completely made it perfect. So there's that sort of thing. We've done shell preparation, roll cage fabrication, all these bits and pieces that add on to. It's the stuff that we love doing. It's the stuff that it's the bread and butter stuff. It's the stuff that we learned. It's the stuff that we're good at. The wiring game was quite a shock that I really enjoyed wiring in the end, because that was something that I never expected. I have to say, because I angry pixies scare me.
I think the wiring does appeal to a certain personality type, and it's definitely.
What are you trying to say, mate? What are you trying to
say? Nothing at all. I also enjoy wiring. So. But it is quite a unique skill set, I think, compared to everything else in the automotive game. Wiring is I think stands out on its own.
It does, and I think for a lot of people, it's really scary.
Yeah, I think that the problem is for a lot of people, you can't see voltage, you can't see current, until it goes wrong and the smoke escapes. And I think that makes it a little bit harder for people to actually be able to visualize what's going on with the power distribution circuits. And, if you can't understand it, it makes it much, much more difficult to do a good job of it.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think the one thing that I remembered Nick saying to me at the time was like, right, just take it one wire at a time. And I think if you do that, then even this great big mess of loom in front of you suddenly becomes a single wire.
Yeah, a bit less daunting when you take it one step at a time.
Isn't it? Because you can look at this great big, often they're birds' nests. They're a nightmare. And nobody wants to touch the darn things. And you think, well, where the hell am I going to start? Well, start somewhere and take it from there. And just do one wire at a time. And I think if you do that, you can be methodical about it. You can make sure everything continues. You can make sure everything's absolutely spot on. And if you do that, you can be in your own world. And before you know it, you've got a brand spanking new loom that's really, really good and reliable and good to look at. Not just a bird's nest of crap. But you have to take it one wire at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other skill that comes with that wiring is just learning also how to read a wiring schematic, a wiring diagram, and those can be sort of a completely different language if you're coming into that fresh. So that, and I think documentation is just so important with the wiring. It's easy when you're doing it. Obviously, it's all fresh in your mind, but you come back to that harness in 6 or 12 months' time. Maybe you need to modify it, add some features to it, and if you don't have that documentation dialed in, it's a very, very slow process, reverse engineering and trying to figure out what you did.
Well, we with the Mini, we made pains to stick with the wiring colors that were in the original looms. So if it was green with a black tracer, we bought green with a black tracer wire. So when you look at the book, that's the wiring diagram, the Haynes manual or whatever it is for that car, it traces all the way through. Even if I put new ones in, it's the right stuff. So that took quite a lot of trying to find the right wire. It took quite a lot of money to be able to buy it. But even now, it's absolutely paid dividends. And Nick, he takes the piss out of me quite a lot for making spreadsheets. but I've got a spreadsheet with every single wire, with every single terminal. And I know damn well that if he says, I need to know where that one goes to that one, I can tell you straight away.
Yeah, I think that's just so important. I mean, it seems like a waste of time, when you're doing it, because it does take time, but it'll save you time in the long run. All right, let's jump into the obvious elephant in the room, which is Project Binky, which I'm going to guess is, for anyone who's listening to this who already knows who you are, that's how they've found out. So what is it and how the hell did it start?
It's all the fault of Mr. Jack Daniels.
He's responsible for a lot of bad decisions.
See, this is the thing. He's just there. He's always in the background, just like, just needling people into making piss poor decisions. So basically, Nick had done 2 minis. He'd done the Mixo, which was the Citroen. So Citroen. Oh gosh, what was it? Saxo, of course. Yeah, Saxo powered. So VTS 1600 16 valve powered Mini, which was essentially a fully space frame front end with the engine and gearbox and running gear from a Citroen Saxo, with the Citroen Saxo rear end, rear axle with the disc brakes and everything on it. It packaged into a Mini. He made all the subframes. He made all the bits and pieces, put it all together. It looked fantastic. It went like literally shit off a shovel. It was really good. It was really, really good. And then he built another one for a bloke who wanted a turbocharged Mini. So he bought, the bloke had bought Metro Turbo A-Series lump and put it in, and it was poor. It was just rubbish. But the bloke loved it. And they both thought they'd got the best Mini. So that's really all that matters from a customer point of view. As long as they're happy with it, that's all that matters. So they both loved their cars, and they both thought they had the best one. And Nick went, well, neither of them are really that good. I reckon I could do better. And at the time, he was driving a 1990 Celica GT-Four, ST185 GT-Four.
I can only imagine that would have been a bit of a rarity in the UK at the time. I mean, in New Zealand, we were quite lucky. We still are quite lucky with our access to the Japanese domestic market models. But
no, it was a UK. Well, no, this one didn't happen to. This one actually was a JDM car, but it was a UK car. We had them over there. Absolutely, we did over here. Sorry. And then he had a really bad accident. A bus. He was stopped in the middle of the road, turning right, because we drive on the left here, and a bus parked. He just didn't stop, and he parked in the back of the car. He just smashed into the back of it. The seat broke. Nick's head ended up right on the rear bumper, the front bumper of this bus. It folded the GT-Four up. He had terrible problems with, and he still does, with movement in his arm and what have you. It's not common knowledge, but it is quite difficult for him sometimes. Anyway, so we got this crashed car that Nick, for some obscure reason, decided to fix and put back on the road. So he did. And then a friend of his gave him another Mini for no apparent reason, a white one. And because these two blokes reckon they got the best Mini, Nick decided to do a better job. And we were drunk one night. I can't remember what we were watching. We were watching something, but we both said, well, why don't we just put the two together? So I said, well, there's no freaking way that you're going to get all of the running gear from that great big ST185 into a 10-foot Mini. He said, I've been measuring it up and it looks like it might go with some modifications. So all right, okay, well, this is the one we're going to film then. So that's how Project Binky started. It was essentially Nick's crashed car against a car that we were given, which was rotten to all hell, and putting the two together. But it was, that was a drunken night thought. We could do that.
Well, look at you now. It turns out you can actually do that. I mean, for those who haven't worked on a Mini, they're tiny. There's not any space for anything. And the GT-Four, or just about any other car for that matter, is big. So you're trying to fit literally a square peg in a round hole. Okay, so obviously that answers the question of why the 3S GTE. You had it there. Was the four-wheel drive conversion at the same time a necessary part of this? I mean, that looks to me like it would add a huge layer of complexity for potentially a limited amount of benefit.
I don't know whether it was that much more difficult, really, because you've still got the 5-speed gearbox. The transfer box comes off the middle of it. So if you're going to go rear-wheel drive, you've still got to put the tunnel down the middle. If you're going to go front-wheel drive, then okay, you don't have to do the tunnel. Because you were using the same subframes and all the running gear, essentially all you needed to do, width-wise, track width-wise, was cover the which we did with fucking great big arches. Now, I mean, those great big arches, they're made to look like sports pack ones. And I'm sure you've seen it, but we model them on the sports pack ones. So at first glance, they don't really look that much different to the sports pack ones. They're just a bit bigger. But no, I don't think it was significantly more difficult to put four-wheel drive on it than it would have been to put either front or rear-wheel drive.
What I guess then have been the biggest challenges with the project? What did you sort of learn that you couldn't foresee coming into it?
That's a good question. It's extremely difficult to quantify and to vocalize just how much every millimeter counts with something like this, because clearance is clearance. If it clears, it's okay. It's not going to rub. I mean, providing there's not a lot of movement, it's not going to rub, but every single millimeter counts. And the most difficult part of it, and I'm not convinced that we've fixed it yet, chopping the front off it, putting the engine in place, making a frame up to put the wings and the front panel in the right place to make sure that we could cover it. The rear end was no drama at all, to be honest. The rear end was basically no problem, but the front end was quite difficult. But the most difficult part was relocating the alternator. And I'm still not convinced that we've got that figured out. And, okay, you could argue whether it was necessary to have air conditioning, whether it was necessary to put an extra, condenser on the front. But the condenser is like 12 mil thick. If you've gone that far, as long as you've got it, you can use it. It's fine. But relocating the alternator was an absolute nightmare. And even now, we looked at absolutely everything. I think I said on one of the videos, we looked at running it off the back axle. We looked at running it off the prop shaft. We looked at running it off anything that turned. And in the front, there is just no room for it. So the solution with the flexi drive, well, only time will tell if it's been successful or not. But that, I think, was probably the most difficult part.
So for those who haven't followed the build, what is the solution for the alternator?
We on the Celica and on the MR2, the 3S powered MR2. If you look at the engine, the alternator is driven off the left-hand side of the engine on a belt on a great big, massive, proper Toyota spec bracket that, it would survive the apocalypse. It would. But there is simply no room for it on the Mini. So what we've had to do is we've relocated the alternator to the right-hand side of the engine above the gearbox with the air conditioning pump in line with it. So the two pulleys are aligned and they're both driven by a belt. That drive is taken from the left-hand side of the engine on a specially made pulley, which is connected to a flexi shaft, which is an aerospace spec. We've found an aerospace spec that would take the torque we needed, which is essentially bent in an S shape from the bottom of the engine, up the back of the engine, up to the top, and to the pulley on the alternator. The pulley on the alternator has a sprag bearing in it, so it drives both one way, but will freewheel the other way when you back off the throttle. We found that recently. So we've changed the design of that slightly, so that's now got a sprag clutch on it. And that, when it's driving, also drives the alternator belt. So it is ludicrously complex and liable to break.
Perfect. That's ideal.
So it has broken a number of times. Every time it breaks, we find a solution for it. You haven't seen them all. We have mentioned a couple of them, but you haven't seen them all. It's an iteration of slightly different designs to try and get to a point where it is reliable. And it may never do. We may have to come up with something else. But at the moment, that's what we're going with.
You mentioned earlier driving the alternator off the prop shaft or maybe the rear differential or something like that. And I've seen that done so many times, and I have never seen it be successful yet. There's so many problems with doing so. And I mean, I get sometimes you are just forced to go with a compromise because there is no room. For a street-driven car as well, I never saw that make any sense, because clearly the alternator is only going to be spinning when the car's actually moving. And no big surprise, we spent a lot of time sitting there with the engine running stationary in a road car, particularly if you're in traffic. And I mean, even then, if you are moving, if you're just crawling along in peak hour traffic, that alternator is not going to be doing much. Be pretty embarrassing, I think, if your battery goes flat and you get stranded in peak hour traffic. So yeah, not ideal, but it does sound like a massive engineering job to do what you've done. Are there any concessions you've sort of had to make in terms of making the engine somewhat serviceable? What I'm getting at with this is I think it's really easy to, build a car like you've done and then sort of back yourself into a corner because space is so tight, and you find later on down the track that even basic service items on the engine become a major, or in worst case scenario might even require the engine to be removed in order to perform them.
No, we set out specifically to make servicing as easy as possible, because it's, as you quite rightly say, it's one of those things that often is overlooked. And let's be honest, changing the spark plugs on this thing, we need to remove the charge cooler. But it's only 2 bolts and 2 Jubilee clips to take it out. And we've made it such that the silicon collars will push back far enough to be able to literally just pull the thing out the top. Every single part, even if it's not a service part, even if it's not oil filters or fuel filters or anything like that, every single thing that we possibly could imagine that we'd need to get to again has been thought about. Whether that means it's had captive, if you've watched the videos, you know how much Nick loves captive nuts, but they're unbelievably important, because it just means that you don't need 2 bloody tools.
Or sometimes 2 people, depending where they are.
Absolutely 2 people. And even the choice of fasteners, if you can't get a socket on it, can it be a cap head? Can that make the difference between being able to assemble this or being able to disassemble this? So no, we've gone to extraordinary pains to make sure that everything is accessible as possible.
I think that is one of those things that you can only learn when you've actually had to work on a car or service a car, that there's been no thought of that, and the absolute frustration of trying to deal with it. I mean, people who are regular listeners probably getting sick to death of this story. I've told it a few times, but my old drag car, when we tube framed the front end of it, it seems stupidity looking back on it now, but the way it was designed, if we wanted to take the gearbox out to service the clutch, which we had to do after every 10 passes, it would totally rinse a 3 triple plate clutch. The only way we could get the gearbox out was to pull the entire engine and gearbox in one unit. So what should have been a 20 or 30 minute job, if that had been thought of in advance, became sort of more like an 8-hour mission. And we learned from that when we built an Evo 9 drag car for a customer that ended up claiming the world record for the late model Evo 4-wheel drive. And we knew that we were going to be in that same situation. So we actually built a custom chromoly subframe, and we designed that subframe so that it was really easy to get that gearbox out. And so we sort of halved the time it took to get a gearbox in and out compared to all the factory components. So you live and learn, and it's all about making your life easy.
But how much difference did that make when you were there at the track? Because the previous time on the old car, you'd have been like, oh shit, got to take the gearbox out.
Well, I mean, it would be the difference between putting my car back in the trailer and going home, because there was no way, for example, we're going to service a clutch between rounds where you might only have an hour and a half. With the Evo 9, not that it ever came to it, we didn't actually have to do that, but you literally could have serviced that at the track and made the next round of racing.
It's one less thing to worry about, isn't it? And even though we built the car right to the, like pretty much finished it, and then took it apart again because, it's been a joy to service. It's been a joy to work on because of all the bloody effort that went into making it like that. I'm not saying that anybody could do it, because you have to have an intimate knowledge of this bloody thing to be able to do it. But you could do it, and everything is captive, everything is metric, everything is dead easy, and not everything is metric, but the Yank stuff's not metric, because
that is one thing that absolutely frustrates me, is having a mixture of imperial and metric fasteners on a vehicle. There's no need for it. I don't care whether you like imperial or metric. That's fine, but just stick to one. Like, let's just
one of them. Yeah,
exactly.
Please, just decide and run with it.
I just wanted to take a moment out of our interview here with Richard and talk about a package of courses I think are going to be really useful to a lot of you listening. Now, particularly, a lot of what Bad Obsession Motorsport are involved with is fabrication. There's a lot of fabrication work, in particular in Project Binky. And I know that a lot of enthusiasts tend to think that fabrication is a skill that's beyond their capability. The reality as well is that it's really expensive if you want to get a large project undertaken by a professional fabricator. It is completely possible for the average enthusiast with a little bit of patience and an eye for detail to learn these skills, and our Ultimate Motorsport Fabrication package is going to teach you exactly that. This starts with our Motorsport Fabrication Fundamentals course, and this teaches you all of the core skills that you're going to need when it comes to fabricating. You'll learn about the different welding techniques, MIG versus TIG welding, for example. You'll learn about tube bending and notching. You'll learn about using dimple dies, and then you'll learn about all of the tools and equipment that you're going to need. And you may actually be surprised that you can achieve a lot with a very modest collection of fabrication tools. Obviously, as you improve your skills and you want to complete more complex jobs, you can start adding to your tools, but you don't have to start by spending thousands. When it comes to motorsport fabrication, fabrication and TIG welding really go hand in hand. It is such a controllable form of welding, and at some point you are just going to need to be able to join two pieces of metal together. So our practical TIG welding course will teach you exactly that. You'll learn how the TIG machine works. You'll learn the techniques of welding different materials, ferrous and non-ferrous, and you'll also have some quick start setup guides for welding different materials and how to set up your TIG welder to help you get success. You'll also learn all of the techniques required to lay down those nice stacked diamond welds, and in no time you'll be fabricating like a pro. On top of this, we're also including 24 months of gold membership, which gives you access to our private members forum. This is the best place to get reliable, trustworthy questions to your fabrication questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly live webinars, and this is an online live lesson that we cover every week, where we might dive into topics such as fabrication, we might cover 3D modeling and CAD. We also could be talking about engine tuning and engine building, or anything in between. If you can't watch live, as a gold member, you also get access to our webinar archive, where we've got over 350 hours of existing content. This is an absolute goldmine of information and one of the fastest ways to expand your knowledge on a huge range of performance automotive topics. So this package is normally $299 US, but you can use the coupon code BAD100. That'll get you $100 off, bringing it down to just $199 US. You're still protected with our 60-day no questions asked money back guarantee, so there is zero risk of purchasing, and there are options at checkout to use our payment plan to just make that $199 US a little bit more affordable. All right, let's get back to our interview now. All right, now, before we started recording, just talking off air, I think you mentioned this project's been on the go for 11 years. I'd picked 39, but I was a little off the mark. It does seem to have taken a while. Let's address that. Why has this project taken as long as it's taken?
Well, because for a vast majority of it, it was just a weekend job. And when you're taking on something like as complex and difficult, let's be honest, it's bloody difficult, then it takes time. And when you haven't got a shed load of time, and when you've only got a couple of days at the weekend, it takes some time. And then once we managed to go full time at it, we were right in the middle of the bit where you could really crack on. And we thought we were going to finish it 2 years ago because everything was running swimmingly. But when you're doing something that at the level that you want to do it, there's not been a time where we've gone, oh, that'll do. And it's very easy with a project car to get it running and get it on the road and think, well, okay, that's brilliant, we're done. And at that point, what tends to happen is you don't ever go back and fix those things you really wanted to fix, those things that you really thought, well, I'll definitely do that, because you got it on the road. Everything's cool. So we've never compromised on the quality of the finish. We never wanted us to go, well, that'll do. We never want to go, well, as long as you're happy with it. It's always got to be spot on. I
think as well, when you're doing this for YouTube, let's be honest, YouTube, the viewers are somewhat critical. So if there's anything that's not 100% right, you can guarantee YouTube will let you know.
Oh, they will absolutely let you know.
Sometimes even if it's perfect, they'll let you know.
Sometimes they get it wrong. Let's be honest. But it's also, it's not their car. So to a certain extent, you can just say, well, bugger them. It's not your car. You don't have to live with it. So we're going to do this our way, and this is this way, and this is why it's taken so long. So for the vast majority of it, it was a weekend only. So that takes an awful lot of time. And since then, I think we did pretty well at getting episodes out very regularly. And that was going extremely well. And then we fell down this rabbit hole that totally screwed everything over. Could we have done a better job, or could we have done a faster job? Yes, absolutely. Could we have done a better job? Probably, but we're very hard on ourselves. We never want to cut any corners. We never want to just do it because it's the sake of it. We don't want to, look, we desperately need to do this because. Now let's get it right the first time. And people will argue whether that's the right approach, or, could we have done things differently? Of course we could. Would you have done things differently? Of course you would.
I think it's one of these things, though, with a project or any project like this. I mean, there is no one single way of progressing and doing it. And you give the same sort of project to 5 people, and they're all going to find their own different approach and solution to the inevitable problems that come about. So I think that's fine. One thing I'm interested in, with a project that spanned this length of time, generally, in most instances, and you could disagree with me here, your skill sets improve. So, for example, maybe you just simply get better at fabrication, you gain more knowledge, you get better at welding, and your results obviously are going to improve. Is there anything that happened along the lines of that, where you sort of look back at some of the earlier work that was done on the car? And I mean, maybe at the time it was done to the best of your combined abilities, but then with the emergence of these new skills, you look back and go, oh, you know what, I could have done a better job of that, and sort of areas of the car that are a frustration because of that? Or is it just perfect?
Nothing's perfect. But yes, you're absolutely right. The skills do increase, and because you can't help but get better at things. There's certain things that may end up being revisited, not necessarily because they don't work, because they wouldn't be on the car if they didn't work, but could they be done better? And it might be that I can't really think of a particular instance of it right now, but I'm sure there are. It may come to me. But yeah, there's certain things where we've gone, do you know what? If we come back to it, we'll do that differently. That's not to say that it's not going to work and it's not valid. It's just that could be tidier, or we could do that in a slightly different way, or that could be designed slightly differently, or we could weld that up differently, or we could make this lighter, or we can make this, So from that point of view, absolutely. Especially in the sort of 3D printing stuff that we've never really, when we first started, it wasn't even a thing. And now with 3D printing and my skills in fusion and what have you, being able to realize that, and you'll see that in the next episode, being able to realize these things out of nothing is a huge thing.
On that front, given that the technologies really weren't there when the project started, these days we're getting to a point where Autodesk Fusion is accessible. 3D scanners are coming down in price. Even your phone will do an acceptable job if you don't need to work to a tolerance of better than 0.5 millimeter, which is absolutely fine for a lot of jobs. Where I'm going with this is, if you were to start again, would it be more viable to actually start by 3D scanning the entire car, or at least the tricky parts like the engine bay and the 3S GT and running gear, and essentially build the car in the virtual world in Fusion before you actually start doing things? And why I'm saying this is, with something where I said before, you're a square peg in a round hole, but realistically you're trying to fit a square peg where there just is no hole at all. And it's that knock-on effect of trying to fit things in place as you build the car and progress. And sometimes you can't see things that are going to trip you up, maybe 5 or 6 steps down this path. And by the time you get there, it's too late, and then it requires a major rework. Versus, being able to build the car in Fusion completely, see where these problems are going to lie, and have solutions for them all before you actually cut or weld anything. Yeah, interested to get your thoughts on that. I mean, obviously, this does bring in a whole new set of skills as well.
I mean, I think there's a lot of merit in the 3D scanning. I mean, as you rightly say, it's come on so quickly over the past few years, and the tolerances available to essentially prosumer, even sort of consumer stuff, is so good now that it almost seems churlish not to try that. Having said that, an awful lot of time is spent in scanning. An awful lot of prep is spent in scanning. It's not a straightforward process. It's not just waving a wand at it. And then you've got to convert that into Fusion. And then you've got to, or whatever software you're using. And then you've got to be able to break that down into sections. And then you've got to be able to design the things that you want to put in there to see if they'll fit in the first place. And I know that Nick especially is very fond of just getting on with it. Because, like, you just stick the engine next to the car, and see if you can do it. Because by the time you've managed to scan it and bugger around with it, and then clean it off, and then put it all back together again, and then stick it in Fusion, and do all the bits and pieces, we could have literally just put the engine in and made a frame up and put the front on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, let's be honest, people have been modifying and building cars from scratch for decades before these technologies even existed. So I'm definitely not here to say that this is the only way forward. And you're absolutely right. The time investment is not insignificant. I think people have this false sense of 3D scanning. We sort of wave the 3D scanner over the front of the car and it magically appears as a 3D model in Fusion 360. There's a bunch of steps in between. So yeah, it's not as easy as that.
It's not. And you've only got to, I mean, I'm sure you're aware of Superfast Matt.
Yes. Yeah, I think we've got him coming up as a podcast guest in the not too distant future.
Fantastic. I love him. I think he's fantastic. And I'm a huge fan of his. And with his Viper, off-road Viper thing, he did loads of it in Fusion, and he scanned it and he put loads of things, and he had to redo a shed load of it because it just didn't fit in the real world.
Yeah.
The moment the real world, the moment that sort of the virtual world joins the real world, sometimes there's a disconnect. And you would have been significantly better off just doing it, just making something. And I know Nick feels very strongly about that.
Yeah, like I say, there's definitely no fixed path you have to go down, but these tools are becoming more accessible and they can offer some advantages.
Oh, they're fabulous. Don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating not using them at all. I use Fusion. I've used your course on Fusion and I loved it, and it's fantastic, and it definitely helped me. And Fusion, I use it all the time.
I think for me, the one of the most useful part of Fusion, and this doesn't require a super in-depth knowledge of 3D modeling and CAD. It doesn't necessarily require an expensive laser scanner, but the sheet metal tools are just so powerful for making brackets and things like this. And then, I don't know what you've got in the UK, but Send Cut Send in the US is obviously a big name at a lot of the automotive YouTubers channels, and send them a file, and a few days later all of your parts turn up. You've got the option to have them also CNC bent, so literally it's a finished part. And I think for a very minor investment in time learning those skills, I mean, it just saves you so much time versus hand making all of these parts. And then you've got a finished product that just looks so much more professional than you could do yourself, well, at least without putting in a huge amount more time. So I think that's probably a big step forward.
Definitely. And not that we've got Send Cut Send here, but we've got other companies that will laser cut that stuff out for you, and if you go to search for them. But yes, I mean, if you want to start somewhere with CAD, if you start on that sheet metal stuff, where essentially you're just extruding a millimeter or 2 mil or whatever you're extruding, you're essentially just drawing something in 2D, and it's very intuitive. It's fantastic, and you can, if you get it wrong, you can just change it. You don't have to make another one. You just get it. And especially if you can proof it, if it's small enough to proof on a 3D printer, oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, how good is technology?
I absolutely love the advent of relatively inexpensive 3D printing with essentially a free consumer sort of Fusion 360 at the home gamer level is free. How the hell is that possible? And it just frees you up to be able to just try stuff.
Now, if you can imagine it, you can pretty much build it.
You can. I've literally got a 3D printer sat next to me. I love it. It's always going because I'm always doing something now. Because once you've got a 3D print, you will know this. Once you've got a 3D printer, you 3D print all of the things.
Yeah. But I think it expands just what you can do. And even if you're just using it to proof a concept, it's nice to actually have that confidence that when you send your parts out for CNC machining or just laser cutting or whatever it might be, you're going to know when they come back. They're going to fit exactly as you expect, and there's not going to be any surprises.
So that's over the course of the last 11 years, none of that was available when we first started. It just wasn't available. And it wasn't even on the horizon as far as I was concerned. It wasn't even a thing that we even imagined. But now we're essentially using it every day. And it's a joy. It's an absolute joy.
All right. Well, let's find out where Project Binky kind of came off the rails. So you've mentioned a couple of times now, alluded to the last couple of years and this rabbit hole you've sort of gone down. So yeah, talk us through it.
We were essentially finished. Not essentially finished. We had a bunch of stuff to do, but the car was the interior was done. We hadn't fitted it all, but the interior was all made. We had some other bits and pieces to finish off, and we got invited to a show, and they said, bring the car along, and we got it running. Our friend Robbie at Track Day Performance in Ireland, I freaking loved this stuff. He dialed into our ECU on the car, and he tuned it on like from 600 miles away, which was just phenomenal. So he just tuned it up and made sure it ran okay. And we took it to a show. We bought these set of matching Smith's gauges because the whole point of the Mini is we didn't want to make it any, forgive the arches, but we didn't want to make it any wider. We didn't want to make it any longer. We didn't want to make it any higher. It had to look like a Mini. So it's still on 13-inch wheels. And part of the Mini-ness of it is being able to see those cues that you get from those cars. So when you look through the window, you'll see the 3 clock gauges and the 3 little 52mm auxiliary gauges with a standard dash. It's a standard dash. All right, it's not quite standard, but it looks just like a standard dash.
But you're still talking analog gauges here versus a 12-inch full color digital dash.
No, 90mm round gauges or 80mm or 85 or whatever the hell they are. Standard gauges, standard Mini stuff, but all matching, all brand new because they run off the ECU and they're this, that, and the other. And we asked them, Smiths, to make a boost gauge that they didn't make a boost gauge in the classic range. They agreed to make us a matching boost gauge. And they all arrived. Great, fantastic. We fitted them all for the show, blah, blah, blah. And then we turned the lights on because we'd wired the whole thing up to work. And we'd turn the lights on because it was dark. And the rev counter and the speedo right in front of you were lit by essentially an asthmatic glowworm. And the voltmeter and the oil pressure gauge were also lit by another 2 asthmatic glowworms. But the new matching boost gauge was lit by LEDs, so it was bright in your face, so none of it matched. Then you look a bit closer and you find that the fonts were different. And okay, at first glance you don't notice, but then you do notice, and then you can't not see it.
Yeah, once it's been seen, it can't be unseen.
No, exactly right. So some of them were sans serif, some of them were serif, so you'd had the little flicks on the... Well, how do they get that wrong? This is the classics range. This is a matching set.
Does seem like quite the oversight.
Oh my God, honestly. So Nick went completely mental because he does. So none of it. So okay, all right, fine. So we can have our own gauges made. Sod it. We'll go to custom gauges, or we'll just get our own gauges made. We've already paid for these bloody things, and they weren't cheap. But none of them match.
I'm assuming you went back to Smiths and they weren't interested in rectifying the situation.
They really weren't, and so much so that the 2 big gauges, the speedo and the rev counter, they both got the dials down the bottom. And when you turn the ignition on, they sweep like the new gauges do. They do it sort of like all the way, sweep them back to 0. So the rev counter would do that, but the speedo wouldn't. The speedo sort of went about 10 degrees and then flickered and then went back to 0. So I phoned them. And I phoned the technical department and I said, does the speedo do a sweep? Is it meant to do a sweep? And they literally couldn't tell me.
Always promising.
So at that point, we gave up with Smiths because, all right, fine.
You obviously weren't going to get the result that you were after.
No. And then we fell down this rabbit hole of we wanted to make our own gauges that looked like a Smiths gauge, looked like a proper classic Mini gauge, but performed like a modern gauge. So they were backlit. Instead of being halo lit around the outside like these words, which essentially is a steel plate with the numbers sort of inked on them, we wanted to be able to backlight them. So when they backlit, they glowed through like a modern car does. But when you looked at them with the lights off, they looked just like a normal Smiths one. Okay, so how do we achieve that? Right, fine. We worked out a way of achieving that. Okay, so how do we make the backlights? So we can make those out of LEDs. Fine, okay. Long story short, by the time we'd worked out everything we wanted to do, the amount of wiring needed to do it, just insane. And individual small wires was just not going to work. So we decided to make a printed circuit board. Now, had I known then what I know now, there's no freaking way we'd have gone down this rabbit hole.
It does sound like you're really setting yourself up for a pretty big task.
It's insane. So we decided it would be a really good idea to try and develop a technique to 3D print our own circuit boards. So we got a 3D printer and we put solder through it, and we printed directly onto FR4 fiberglass, because solder, the right solder, melts at the same temperature as, let's say, ABS does. So there's nothing wrong with that. And the extruder is still extruding a cold 1.75, 1.6 mil solid thing, just like it would. So it occurred to us that we could probably do this. So we bought a really cheap printer and tested it. And it sort of worked.
Has anyone else done this?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Interesting.
It's probably because there's a gazillion people in the world. But as far as I'm aware, nobody's tried this. Or they've tried it and went, that's ridiculous. You can just go and get one made in China for £4 in 10 days. It's fine.
Yeah, and I think the thing that sort of we need to keep in perspective here as well is you absolutely probably can. I mean, I don't do electronics, but I'm also guessing that to get these made at a reasonable cost, fine if you're doing 10,000 of them. Probably if you want one, it's going to be a little bit harder to get that across the line.
No.
That's
the beauty about it, is that they're not that expensive. The problem, Andre, is that you need to know what you want, and you need to be exactly sure of what you want and how to do it to be able to design a circuit board, to be able to then go and get created. And then when that doesn't work because you've forgotten something, you then need to get another one done, and then another one done, because none of them, they're all essentially prototypes until you've got it all finished. But of course, all that takes time. So we thought, well, sod it. If we can print directly to FR4 fiberglass a solder trace 0.2 mil thick by 0.5 mil wide, that will give us enough amperage, because we tested it, to take absolutely anything we want, and we can print it really, really accurately. So we took an awful lot of time developing and proofing and perfecting this process. We moved it from the 3D printer onto our Tague mill, and we used our Tague mill. We put a fourth axis on as the extruder, so we could print because the board, the dash cluster, is 292 mil long. I think the 3D printer we didn't have wouldn't do that, so we needed to have the length, the x-axis, the x travel. So we moved it to the mill, and we made the mill into a printer. And we designed a little board, a little Arduino-powered box, which controls the MOSFETs, that control the heaters, that control this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. But we didn't know how to do any of this. So we had to learn it while we were doing it. So as well as developing a completely new technique, we had to learn how to do it as well. So that was kind of why that took so long. And then we've recently found a problem with our shed that has caused us significant problems over the past couple of years that we didn't know we had. We fixed it now, and everything's perfect, but we didn't know we had it, that was causing us loads of problems, and we just didn't know why. So that's been a nightmare. But then, of course, learning Arduino, to use the Arduino to its maximum capacity. So we're using it for controlling servos to do the water temperature and fuel temperature gauges. They're now not gauges at all. They're servos with an arm on them, which they're fantastic. We've had to learn electronics to do voltage dividers and to do control of the WS2812B. This is stuff I never knew 2 years ago. I didn't even know what WS2812B, but now I've taken them apart. And it's just been hell, because would have been easier to farm it out.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you knew what you were getting yourself in for, it would have been easier to persevere with Smiths or find an alternative manufacturer.
It would. But the problem was that the 3D printing solder was so close to being perfect almost straight away that we thought, well, we can crack this. We can do this.
Yeah, you've seen the potential.
And then it just kept everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And then went wrong again, and then again. And it just kept kicking us in the ass. And it's been extraordinarily frustrating for people. And I know it's been a nightmare for everybody, but you have no idea how frustrating it has been for us.
I can imagine.
Because nobody wants to finish this bloody car more than we do.
I think it's really easy for your viewers, your subscribers to sort of get angry because it's not finished, but you're the guys who are actually hands-on working on it. And like you say, I mean, you want it finished more than the viewers do, I'm sure.
Oh, God, yeah. But
at this point, where are you at with the project? I mean, is there light at the end of the tunnel? Can you see the finish line?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Gosh, yeah. I mean, even last week, we finished the 3D printing. All of the traces are done. And when you see it, hopefully you'll think that's pretty fucking cool. I think you'll find it pretty cool. And it you'll go, I'm sure you'll go, you're insane. There's no way you should have done that, because I know this. I'm acutely aware that there is no freaking way that we should have gone down this route. But we did, and that's where we're at. But yes, we finished the 3D printing. Actually, everything's going on the board. So we're putting resistors and transistors and voltage regulators, and they're all being done at the moment. The whole board is going together. We've been filming for months now. I've got probably half the video already done. This is 39, and probably 40, because there's probably going to be split into two. There's an awful lot in this one. It's an awful lot of stuff. And once the dash cluster and the instruments are in, it's just finishing off them. I've done an awful lot of it. Well, Nick's been buggering around with that sort of stuff. I've been learning hydrographics. I've done loads of stuff with the little trim bits in the car. So I've been making side bolsters and seat covers and rail covers and bits and pieces, and they're all in and done and filmed. So I wouldn't say there's very little to do, but
sometimes those small details are the ones that sort of take the longest as well, which is the frustrating part. Anyway, I think the difference between what I've seen with Project Binky and your average project car is that attention to detail in the fit and finish, particularly when you're designing a whole new interior. That's a big job, and I think it's very easy to sort of put a different seat in a car, even to make up door cards, but to get everything in the car finished to a high standard in a way that all makes sense, like it looks like it was designed by an OE manufacturer, that's really tricky. So I take my hat off to you on that front, because you've definitely nailed that as far as I see.
Thank you. Yeah. And Nick's obsession, or Nick, not obsession, but Nick's experience with taking apart thousands of cars over the years allowed him to visualize what were the best parts available for that and what would work well together, and then he'd be able to say, right, well, that's off a Mitsubishi L200, or that's a so-and-so, I need that bit. So and what's better than OEM stuff, crikey? I mean, if you can use OEM stuff, use it.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Because they've done the work for you. As long as you can attach it correctly and you can trim it nicely, use OEM stuff, because it's easy. Couldn't
agree more. All right, once it is finished, and it sounds like that's probably not too far off, which is great. Once it is finished, what are you intending to use it for? Is it actually going to get driven, or is it sort of now at a point where so much time, effort, and money's gone into it that you sort of don't want to scratch it / potentially damage it?
No, I think it's definitely. I mean, look, we've never been precious about it. I mean, it's probably the most expensive bloody money in the world, but it's not. It's Nick's car. He's not precious about it. We've already knocked the bloody one of the rear arches off it. It's going to get used, because part of the story of the car is the context in which it's being designed for. So, for example, why would you put a rear window wiper on it? It's a freaking Mini. Well, if you saw the roads that we have to deal with where we live, and the weather that we have to deal with where we live, you'll see why you need a rear wiper. So part of the joy of this is being able to use it on the roads that it was designed to do. The reason that we put all these things in there hopefully will become apparent. But it absolutely will get used. There's no question about it. For about 20 miles. And then we're going to put a sheet over it and burn it.
It's always a shame when you sort of see a project car through to fruition and then it just gets parked in a corner and never actually gets used the way it's intended, which I think is a hell of a shame.
No, we haven't gone to this trouble not to use it.
All right, cool. We'll move on from Project Binky, and I did allude to one of your other project, which is Bargain Racement earlier in the interview, so I think we need to do justice to this a little bit. So, very different project to Binky, but can you give us a sort of a 30,000 foot view of Bargain Racement? What is it? What was it intended to be?
This was pandemic 2020. I came across on Twitter the BRSCC, the British Racing and Sports Car Club, had launched. I mean, this is the worst possible timing for it, right in the middle of the pandemic. A new series that they wanted to do, which was called the City Car Cup, which was about as entry level as it is possible to get. So you get a shopping with the Citroen C1, the Toyota Aygo, and the Peugeot 107. They're all the same car. They're all built essentially by Toyota, just dressed slightly differently. And you could just buy one of those, and they provided a kit for an amount of money, which was the roll cage, all the stuff that you needed to do. There was essentially two kits. There was the safety kit, which was all the stuff that you need, all the sort of mandatory stuff like the dampers, the wheels, the tires, the cage, all that sort of stuff which was mandatory. And the safety kit, which was if you wanted to, you could buy the seat and the harness and all the bits and pieces. So they provided two kits. If you bought the car, you can put it all together. And I thought, when I looked at that, I thought, that's genius. I love that idea. It's extremely inexpensive comparatively for racing. It makes total sense. It's 68 horsepower. It's a 3-cylinder, but who cares? Because you're just racing against somebody else in the same car.
I was just going to say that I think it doesn't actually really matter how fast you're going if everyone around you is going the same speed. And as an entry level, which it sounds like it is, as an entry level form of motorsport, I think you're better off starting with something that's a little bit slower while you're building up that racecraft, learning the skills of racing. At least, if you sort of come unstuck with 60 odd horsepower, whatever you said it's got, you could probably, in a worst case scenario, sort of while you're sliding sideways towards the barrier, undo your sort of harnesses, open the door and get out and walk away. Yeah. So there's definitely something to be said for that. And driving a slow car fast is incredibly rewarding as well.
It really is. It really is. It absolutely is. So I just got, I thought, well, I love that. And I rang a guy called Greg Graham, who we've become extremely good friends with. He's a fantastic guy. He knew of us, and I said, look, can we do something together here? And he totally got it immediately. He absolutely bought in. He lent into it straight away and said, yes, let's do something. So they helped us with the price of the kits. They didn't give it for free. I think they give it to us at cost. So the kits were available to us at cost. We bought the car, and we decided to do a build series on how much it takes to go racing. We're not going to hide anything. So this is how much the kit costs. I'm not saying that's how much we paid for it, but that's how much the kit costs. That's how much that's how much we paid for a car. This is how much it costs and what's involved in getting your race license. This is how much it costs for a race entry. This is what it takes for your membership. This is how much it costs to go there. This is how much it costs to go for your hotel. This is how much we spent on this, that, and the other. So basically, we and your race suit and your helmet and your gloves and all the bits and pieces. So we basically tried to demystify what it takes to go racing, because it's so full of crap out there and there's so many things missed to try and get you into it that we just thought, sorry, we'll build the car. We're not going to show you how to build a car. We'll show you how we build the car, and then we'll go racing. You can come with us. We basically thought, if you're watching it, I'm hoping that what you feel is you're part of the crew. So you're there with us. You're on our shoulder. We're going to racing. This is what happens at a racetrack. This is what happens. Scrutineering wasn't the thing back in those days because of the bloody pandemic. But this is what happens when you go to the park family. This is what happens. And it was an absolute joy to do. The car didn't take very long to build because it was simple. And we had 9 episodes and they all started out. And the idea was to give the car away to charity at the end of it. And we did. And then the car was used again, and we were invited to race it. But Bargain Racement is one of my favourite things because there were 10 drivers at the end of 2020 when it first opened up over here, who'd built a car, 9 or 10 drivers. And we raced on the back of another grid. And at the same time that we were racing, the series started. And at the first race of the following year, which was their first standalone series, Nick and I went along to Donington Park for the first race, and there were 38 cars on the grid.
Wow. That's impressive. And I think that's so important because here in New Zealand, we have a lot of race classes where you'll turn up and there's 5 entrants or 6 entrants. It's not the same. Big grids make it just so much more exciting because, of course, within a grid, you're always going to have the guys or girls who have got a bit more skill and are up the pointy end, and then you've got the ones that maybe aren't quite so sharp. Maybe they're just getting started and they'll be at the back, and then you've obviously got the midfield group as well. And I think if you've got 38 cars, no matter what your personal level of skill is, you're going to be able to find a group to battle with. And that's just so much more fun than just driving around by yourself, looking cool and setting lap times.
Oh, totally. And we walked through the paddock and like almost everybody was like, "This is your fault, Brunning. This is your fault, Blackhurst." And for me, that was just the most fantastic thing because I love motor racing. I genuinely love motor racing, whether it's cars or karts or rallying or hill climb or drag. I don't care. I just love motor racing. And being able to influence people and be able to give them permission or being able to help people get into motor racing it's just the best thing. It was just the best thing. I loved it.
Yeah, 100%. All right, well, let's chuck some numbers around this. I mean, obviously it's only going to be relevant to this particular car class, etc. in the UK, but I mean, still, there's comparable forms of racing, I would probably argue, in most countries. So, while, you're not going to be in this exact class in the US or Australia or New Zealand, there's going to be something similar. So, what sort of numbers would the average enthusiast need to be chucking at this class to get a car and add those 2 kits and get on track for the first time?
I think you'd probably be able to put a car together. If you could do the work at home, you could probably put a car together from scratch at about £6,000. I think you can buy one now for less than that, complete, because we're a few years on now, and there's been quite a lot of cars around. So you can buy a complete car for probably 4.5 or 5, ready to go. So it's not that expensive.
Now, I think the thing that is easy to forget about is that's only part of the cost of going racing. Obviously, it's a big ticket item, actually getting a car and all of your safety gear so you can actually go and compete on track. But the ongoing cost of racing can get up there, particularly if you're on a slick tyre, which, the tyres that we run on our Toyota 86 endurance car, I mean, those work out to be about, I think, 750 New Zealand dollars per corner. And they'll do a couple of hours of endurance racing, and they're really only good for practice sessions after that. So that in itself adds up. So give us some insight into what would you sort of ballpark a figure for a race weekend would be for that class?
For car maintenance, assuming you've not bent anything, I don't know, probably 250 quid.
That's cheap.
I mean, it really is, because the tyres are the Nankang's terrific tyre, wet and dry. There's plenty of grip. They wore out fairly well. One set did us all 4 rounds that we did, and set a pair of fronts. The rears just last forever. And you change the oil, you put some fuel in it, but they're so fuel efficient, you didn't really need a lot.
Yeah, well, when you're making 3 horsepower, you're not really going to be using a lot of fuel.
Let's be honest. I mean, you didn't even need to change the bloody oil, really, but you only do it because you just do it. That's probably the most expensive bit.
Sometimes you feel like you've got to be doing something on the car between rounds.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So you're looking at 50 quid a tyre new. So probably consumables, probably 200 quid. You're probably looking at 295 to 300 quid to maybe 325 now for a race entry. So that's quite expensive.
Yeah, that's up there.
And then you're looking at hotel bills and dragging the car there if you've got a van or a car with a trailer.
I think, as far as motorsport goes, it probably doesn't get too much cheaper than that. The next question I've got is, in a class like this that's going to be super competitive, you've got to have a bunch of rules. I'm assuming there are, in order to keep the playing field level. And as soon as those rules, we start trying to find workarounds for those rules. So is there a bit of sort of cheating going on?
I don't know what you mean, Andre. I can't comment on that.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, the first championship year, the rule book was somewhat different to the first year that we did it because well, look, if you've got a rule, the first rule of motor racing is you try and find an advantage. So you look through the rule book and you try and find an advantage in the rule book. And people say, lots of people got annoyed with us for doing this. It's like, oh, you're cheating. No, I'm not cheating. I'm trying to find an advantage in the rules. And it wasn't as if that Greg wasn't aware of everything we were doing, because we'd phone him and say, Greg, it doesn't say we can't do this. Can we do this? And he knew all along what was going on. And some things he told us not to do. And some things he said, yes, well, I can't really see. And if anybody protests, they'd have to go through it, but I can't see. So he would give us permission to do it in a way. And then, of course, the following year, all the things that we bent were excluded. So
the rule book developed around you.
We sort of stress tested the rule book a bit, yeah. So that was kind of fun.
Yeah.
But I love doing that.
I mean, that happens in any form of motorsport. And yeah, the people who do the best job of interpreting what the rules mean versus maybe what they actually specifically say are going to get themselves a pretty healthy advantage. Without going too deep into this, I'm just wondering if you could give us maybe an idea of what levers, figuratively, you had available to pull on that particular car in order to dial it into a particular track or improve the handling or otherwise make it faster than the next car.
Not a lot, because the dampers and spring rates were fixed. The dampers were adjustable, but like any relatively inexpensive adjustable damper, the moment you take it off the seat, it's never linear. So you're always it's always a compromise. So you can put it out, I don't know, 5 or 6 clicks, but once you've got past the 3rd click, is the 6th click making any difference? Probably not. Until it gets to sort of Ohlins and stuff where it really does. But those relatively inexpensive ones really don't do a huge amount of that. The biggest thing you could change with that particular car, the rear hub arrangement was bolted on with 4 bolts. So you were allowed to change the camber angle by putting spacers in between the hub and the subframe and the sort of the trailing arm. So that made a huge difference. That was the one thing that did make a big difference was changing the camber angle on the back, because, oh my God, did it understeer. It understeered like absolute crazy. And you'd get like huge amounts of bump steer. It was utterly ridiculous. But once you got your head around it, it was relatively easy to drive around because there wasn't a huge amount of power. So you weren't pushing on with a load of power on understeer. The initial turning was really quite good, actually. The moment you started trying to pick up the power, though, she just went off because she was steering on the back. No, there wasn't a lot, but tire pressures was the key to it. Tire pressure was the absolute key to it.
Yeah, I think that tire pressure is a very powerful tuning tool that is so often underrated. And using it to your advantage, particularly if you're monitoring, tire temperatures, using a tire pyrometer back in the pits, seeing how well you're working the entire width of that tire tread and getting it into that window where you're using all of it. Yeah, absolutely game changer. But you can also change the handling balance by maybe going outside of that window to make the car more prone to oversteer or understeer as well. So it can be quite a powerful tuning tool.
Very much so. And I don't think people maybe not given enough credit. They get told that you should be, 28, 30 hot or whatever it is. And they stick there and never try, 60 hot on the rear because they just don't think it's a good thing to do. But once we'd found the tire pressures, because there was so little that you could change in a normal way of changing the handling, we soon settled to find that the tire pressures was key. But I think you're right. It's overlooked to a certain extent. And unless, as you say, you're monitoring everything and writing it down, so you're inside, middle, outside tire temperatures, the moment they come in, hot as you possibly can, and then make a change and try again. Tire pressures, certainly in a road car, I think, certainly in a tin top, they maybe get overlooked, as you say. They're very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, again, as you say, when you've got a limited number of things that you can change, really important to work with those. I think in motor racing, I find there's not a lot of black and white with things such as setup. there's trends, there's an understanding of what a certain change is likely to do, but at the end of the day, I think the important part is to actually test and let's see what an additional 10 psi of tire pressure does. That's probably a slightly large change, but let's step up in 2 psi increments to start with, and go to a point where you see a noticeable downside to your performance, and okay, well, fine, we found that limit, let's go back the other way. And I think testing that and actually finding out what works for you in the car, because again, a lot of this can be a personal preference. It's not sort of one setup that's going to be fast for every driver. I think just testing and finding that is really important.
Testing's so important, and writing your testing down, having a plan, and being able to refer to it.
That's actually interesting you say that, because I think as well for test days or just a casual track day, going there without a plan and just going and turning laps, useful to a point. You're getting track time and that's valuable, but I think it's really important if you're trying to improve the car is to have a plan of each session. Okay, these are the things I'm going to change, this is what I'm looking for, and then taking notes on those changes and what was positive and maybe what was negative, so you can actually start finding a direction to move forward in.
Oh, totally. But it's also extremely easy, especially on a track day or somewhere where you've got limited time or limited sessions, is to be tempted to try too many things at once. My God, you just don't know what you've done. You have no idea what's worked and what hasn't.
Scientific method is obviously a sensible way of going about this. Make one change at a time so you can assess that change on its own, but we don't always have the luxury of that. So I think we're a little bit spoiled as well with our local racetrack is kind of run like a golf club. So you buy a membership and they do have race meetings, but maybe 5 or 6 of those a year, maybe 6 or 8. And the rest of the time, basically any day of the week, you can go along between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. and go out on the track until you run out of fuel. Which is great, because I sort of find, I'll give you an anecdote here. We had some shock travel damper position sensors, long-winded word, damper pots basically on one of our 8.6s, and I was gathering some data on how these worked and what they were telling me. And at the time we had a set of two-way adjustable BC racing coilovers, so pretty much like a cheap entry-level street coilover. And what I wanted to do is assess the changes. So I could go out on the track, do a warm-up lap, and then I'd do one flying lap, and then a cool down, come in, look at the data, and we're using Motec's I2 data analysis, and it would give you a shock travel histogram. So kind of without getting too far into it, the idea is you sort of see where your histogram is skewed towards bump or rebound, and then you can make appropriate changes. And ideally, you sort of should end up with something that looks a bit like a normal distribution curve. And mine were quite skewed to start with. Quickly found out with those BC Racing coilovers as well, I made sort of like 2-click adjustments and went out again, looked at the histograms, they hadn't changed, they're identical. And I quickly found out you actually got no change in the damping performance for about the first, I think it was either 6 or 8 clicks. It had 32, so there's plenty there, but there's this dead band of just nothingness. So I was sort of second guessing, am I doing this right? Why does the data not stack up? And then I got into that control range, and all of a sudden we started seeing this change. But the ability, where I'm going with this, is the ability to just go out on the track, do my warm-up, my flying lap, my cool-down, come in, immediately look at data, make a change, and go straight back out. I didn't have to wait an hour for my next session. It allowed me as a non-professional driver to be more consistent in the way I drove the car, because that's obviously important, feel the difference it was giving. And by the time I actually got these into the ballpark and dialed into where the histograms kind of looked like they should, I think I'd shaved almost a full second off my lap time, which at that point, that's huge. And I actually did an ABA test, because I couldn't believe that difference and thought, I'm just getting better at driving today. So I actually went back to the baseline and I dropped off. Maybe I was a 10th different to my first lap, but it proved that difference was in fact the damper. So I'm privileged in that respect, because you can't always do that, but it is difficult with your average test day, because you can't just be out on track, and maybe there's traffic as well, so it's difficult to get that consistency.
It is, but that's what you got to try and aim for.
It's always a moving target anyway. Your tires are going to be changing, there's a lot of things that change your fuel load, etc. So it is difficult to be very specific on it, but that worked for me anyway. All right, Richard, I think we should probably start wrapping this thing up now that we're around the 2-hour mark. It's gone a little longer than expected. And we've got, of course, the same 3 questions we ask all of our guests. And the first of those is, what's next in the future for you and Bad Obsession Motorsport?
Well, first things first, we've got to finish the Mini. Once we've finished the Mini, I'll be much happier. At that point, we can take it and we can show it to people. And I think that's... I'd love to, if there was demand and there was a way of making it happen, I'd love to come down under and see our Antipodean friends and show it to the people that have been so generous in their time in watching us and bringing it to the States and stuff. But certainly the UK to start with, let's do that. And then we've still got the truck, which we're committed to doing. And we've got about 1,000, not 1,000, but certainly we've got 14 or 15 different projects in the shed that need their attention, and I don't know which one to do next.
Is it difficult? You obviously have got this following that's broadly and mainly built up over Project Binky, so they've kind of come in because of this love for this one project. Is there a fear that you choose the next big project? Obviously, you mentioned you've got this truck project going on as well. Is there a fear that you pick the wrong project and all of a sudden your subscribers drop off and it just doesn't have that same hit that Project Binky had?
There's always that fear, but I think if you're true to your audience, which basically means you're true to yourself in as much as that you're not doing things any differently. It might be a different project, but the way that you're presenting it and the way that you're attempting to do the things that you're doing is much the same. So essentially the ingredients, I hope that people will come with us, irrespective of what the project is, because nothing can possibly be as difficult as the Mini was. So nothing will take as much time as the Mini was.
Famous last words.
No, it can't be. It cannot possibly be, and it will never be. It's just, we just can't do it again like that. It's just not happening. Not to say there won't be different challenges, and there won't be things that we love doing, which is getting round corners and making things work that shouldn't work, but they won't be quite as difficult as the bloody Mini was.
I think every project is going to have its own certain appeal, and I think as well, you find that a lot of people that follow you, subscribe, are there for your personalities as well, and within reason, they're not specifically going to care what you're actually working on, but a new project is also going to probably appeal to a whole new market and get a whole bunch more people along for the ride too.
That's what we hope, yeah.
All right, next question. Is there any advice you'd give to a younger version of yourself or perhaps one of our listeners to help fast-track your career or potentially maybe get around some of the hurdles or pitfalls that you've come across in your time?
Outsource instrument clusters to somebody who knows what they're doing. That would be really handy. To myself, probably not. But I think the one question we get asked quite a lot by people is, how did you learn to do the stuff that you do? How do you do that? And the way that I always answer that is that you just give yourself permission to get it wrong. Because if you give yourself permission to get it wrong, you can learn from that. You never learn from getting it right because you've got it right. So don't be afraid, within reason, to get it wrong. If you weld that and it's an absolute piece of crap and it looks like it's just awful, grind it back, try again. If you slice that piece of metal in the wrong place, get another piece of metal and don't slice it in the wrong place. Mark it up differently. Just give yourself permission to get it wrong, because it's the same I say to I've got 9-year-old twins, and then they say, how did you get so good at racing? Well, I've won far fewer races than I've lost. And that's the same for everybody, because you just got to go through that and you can't be afraid to get it wrong. So whether it's wiring, whether it's fabrication, whether it's don't worry about it. Just learn from it and carry on, because it's the only thing that will keep going and keep learning is by getting it wrong. And I've done that in absolutely everything. And I still do it now. I get it wrong all the time.
Yeah, I reckon that's great advice. I mean, we do absolutely learn more from our failures than our successes, but I think we're also pre-programmed that failure is not okay. And the reality is it absolutely is. I mean, no one kind of comes out of the womb with a God-given gift for fabrication or engine building or wiring or whatever it may be. These are all learned skills. And the fact is, they can be learned. But at the same time, an understanding of the fundamentals of whatever that task is you want to do is obviously key. We need to know how it works and what materials, consumables, tools we need to do it. But then there's the hard part of actually becoming proficient at that particular skill. You can know everything there is to know about TIG welding, how the machine works, what all of the adjustments do. But knowing that is not going to mean that the first time you pick up that TIG torch and some filler rod, you're going to lay down a perfect bead of weld. That part just requires time on the torch, like all of these skills do. So put in the time and you'll get the result.
Yeah, too right.
All right, last question for today. If people want to follow you and see what you're up to, if they're not already, how are they best to do that?
Well, we're on our socials. You'll find us on Twitter or X or whatever it is now at Bad Obsession MSP. You can see us on YouTube at Bad Obsession Motorsport. You'll pick us up on there. We're on the Facebook and Instagram. We've got a website, badobsessionmotorsport.co.uk, and we're available. You can email us and you can abuse me on Twitter. You can do what you like. You can we're available pretty much all the time. So hopefully you can check us out. And we got a merch store on the website as well if you fancy a bit of that. We've made our own range of switches, which is quite cool. I don't know if you come across those. We've got our own automotive switches, which for the first time ever, they're a nice 22mm round switch latching. These I've got momentary coming, but they have a backlight. They have 2 LEDs in them. So if you wire them to your side light circuit, you'll be able to see them at night, and then they change over to the correct warning colour.
Lovely. All right.
And so we had those made. We had those designed and made.
Well, as usual, we'll put a link to all of those accounts in the show notes to make it super easy for people to find. Look, Richard, it's been a pleasure getting a chance to actually chat with you and learn a little bit more about the backstory and learn that Project Binky will, in fact, actually be complete. Very happy to hear that. So thanks for your time today, and we wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you very much, Andre.
If you enjoyed this episode of Tuned In with Richard from Bad Obsession Motorsport, we'd love it if you could drop a review on your chosen podcasting platform. These reviews really help us to grow our audience, and that in turn helps us to continue to get more high quality guests. To say thanks, each week we'll be picking a random reviewer and sending them out an HPA t-shirt free of charge anywhere in the world. This is also a great place to ask any questions you might have too, and I'll do my best to answer them if your review gets picked. So this week, a big shout out to Vader9 from the United States, who has said, best technical automotive podcast out there. I learned something new that I can apply to my 240SX project with every episode I listen to. There is so much great content packed into each episode. Thank you, HP Academy, for doing what you do. Well, no problem, Vader, and great to hear that you're enjoying our content. If you get in touch with your t-shirt size and shipping details, we'll get a fresh tee shipped straight out to you. All right, that concludes our interview. And before we sign off, I just wanted to mention for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now, remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.